Macbeth is Shakespeare's darkest and bloodiest play. If you're looking for happiness, you'll not find it here. The land and its inhabitants are subjected to one bloody unnatural act after another throughout. Even at the end, with the tyrant deposed and the rightful heir ready to take the throne, there is no happiness, but relief and sorrow at what has happened. No, one should not look for a light-hearted story here. And that is fitting because this is the study of evil and vaulting ambition. From the first line to the end of the play, the land is covered by darkness. Although the first scene takes place during the day, the stage directions and words of the witches show us that the land is shrouded in literal darkness because a storm lashes the northern country. This is obvious symbolic overtures and introduces the unrelenting darkness or evil that Scotland is facing and will face throughout the play. The presence of the witches at the beginning is also portentous and sets the dark atmosphere. This is because the witches would have immediately been understood as being forces of evil by Shakespeare's audience. They are not benign actors or agents. They are evil. In addition to this, a metaphorical darkness covers Scotland because a battle rages on the land, some miles from where the witches stand. War is bad enough, but when one's foes are a mixture of treasonous soldiers led by a treasonous thane, as well as external forces, it makes it all the more bitter. From the first lines of the play, then, Scotland is shown to be a land thoroughly covered in darkness and sets up an appropriate atmosphere for the play. It is literally covered in darkness by the storm. Agents of evil roam the land and do business with the leaders of Scotland in Macbeth and Banquo. Both enemies from without and treasonous forces from within wage war on Scotland. It is not a place beset by happiness. It is covered in darkness. One might be forgiven for thinking that the darkness abates with Scotland's glorious victory, the arrest of the traitor, and the abating of the storm. Certainly, this is what the king thinks. Great happiness, he cries, when he hears of the favourable outcome of the battle. Similarly, when approaching Macbeth's castle, he makes the dramatically ironic statement, "This castle hath a pleasant seat. The air nimbly and sweetly recommends itself unto our gentle senses." Unfortunately for Duncan, he couldn't be more wrong. Although the battle is over, the traitor has been caught, and the storm abated, the forces of darkness have already gained an ally in Macbeth and his wife, a pair of traitors who call upon evil spirits and darkness itself to hide their thoughts and desires. "Come, you spirits that tend on mortal thoughts, unsex me here and fill me from the crown to the top full of direst cruelty," says Lady Macbeth after reading Macbeth's letter and determining to push him to commit the murder. "Stars, hide your fires, let not light see my black and evil desires," says Macbeth after he realizes that he will not simply be handed the crown, but will have to do something to gain it. There is a momentary calm, but this is but a brief respite before the great storm to come. Macbeth and Lady Macbeth call on evil and ally themselves with the forces of darkness. No, the darkness has not lifted. It only thickens. One of the features of the exposition, apart from setting up the story and creating the atmosphere, is that it introduces us to the characters. Macbeth is Scotland's saviour. A brilliant soldier and general, he emboldens those who follow and wins a set of great victories for Scotland. He is well thought of by the Scottish soldiers, the noblemen, and the king himself. The early scenes of the play are full of complimentary words for Macbeth. But all's too weak for brave Macbeth. Well, he deserves that name. He is also valour's minion, a peerless kinsman, and a worthy gentleman. Clearly, Macbeth is well thought of and a great hero of Scotland. He is the bloody, unconquerable soldier, bold, brave, and unshaken in the face of terrible odds. He and Banquo stood against the enemy armies, giving courage to the shaken forces around them. It was upon Macbeth's shoulders that the chances of victory rested. Almost alone, he fought his way through the onslaught and broke the enemy's forces by unseaming the enemy general from nave to the chaps. What of Macbeth's other characteristics, though? Was he simply a brave and brilliant soldier and general? Not at all. Throughout the play, he is shown to be a perceptive intellect. His wife acknowledges his ambition, but says that he lacks the illness that should go along with it, because he is too full of the milk of human kindness. Clearly, the person closest to Macbeth thinks that Macbeth is a mostly moral, kind, and decent man, not the tyrant that we see him become later on. Macbeth, by all accounts then, is a great man, but he is flawed. And ironically, the intellect and attributes that make Macbeth a great hero are also the things which make him capable of carrying out the evil with which the witches tempt him. So Macbeth is a great man, but he is flawed. But it is that greatness, that nobility of character, that intellect and goodness that also makes his fall so tragic and reminds us that it is possible of any of us ourselves. It is the fall of them and so tragic. Lady Macbeth is another interesting and tragic figure. She appears to be ruthless, but even when she shows her ruthlessness, her innate goodness shines through when she summons the forces of darkness to help her push her husband to gain the goal of his ambition. It is the fact that she has to call on the spirits that tend on mortal thoughts to help her and equip her that betrays her apparent cruelty and ruthlessness. It might be strange to think that a character who says that she would bash out the brains of her child while suckling at her breast could be described as anything other than cruel and ruthless. But when you see how she reacts to the sleeping Duncan, it becomes apparent that it's easy to say these things, it is another thing entirely to do them. But Lady Macbeth is also interesting because of the questions that are raised when we consider her actions. Why was she so determined to help her husband become king? Was it motivated by her own ambition? Or was it motivated by love for her husband? Why did she do it? Why did she sell her soul to the devil? And before moving on to the final section, I will say a few things about Duncan, Banquo, and the witches. Duncan, by all accounts, is a good king. Though he's not as good as the English king, who is so good that he can cure disease by touching the sick person, making him the complete opposite of Macbeth, by the way, Duncan is a good king. Duncan's good qualities are well known to Macbeth. In fact, one of the chief things that gives him pause about killing Duncan is that he is such a good king, so noble in character, that the angels will witness against Macbeth on King Duncan's behalf. Duncan, however, for his part, is flawed in that he is overly trusting and does not see the betrayal coming. Not much is revealed to us about Banquo, other than the fact that he is also a good soldier and great general. But we can say that his response to later events, in the light of his knowledge about the witches' prophecies, is questionable. Why did he not do anything? Why did he not confront Macbeth? And why did he become fixated on the possibility of his own descendants becoming kings? The witches are evil personified, malevolent, hideous, and mischievous. They bring disaster upon the royal household and Scotland itself. They are clearly tempting figures who mess with Macbeth for no clear reason and represent the activities of the forces of darkness, which need no reason for creating trouble. They are not, for example, ordered to interfere with Macbeth and Scotland, as we can see by Hecat's response to their work in Act 3, Scene 5. They are evil personified. No consideration of the first act of Macbeth would be complete until the prophecies are mentioned. It is, after all, the 6 prophecies that set off the play and create the situation that causes there to be a story that follows. The witches greet Macbeth as the Thane of Glamis and the Thane of Cawdor, and as the future king. Of course, Macbeth does not know that he has already been named the Thane of Cawdor because of the current Thane of Cawdor's treachery. And so once he discovers this, his ambition is stirred, and he contemplates the possibility of receiving the Golden Round. This temptation is an introduction to the seductive nature of unrestrained ambition and power, or the desire for power, that is. Of course, not all ambition is evil in and of itself, but it does have the potential to drive one to great evil. It is because of the ambition that Macbeth already has, and because of his ambitious nature, that the witch's prophecies have such a potent effect on Macbeth. It is at that weak point that the forces of evil strike, and whether one believes in literal forces of darkness or not, it is a lesson for all who observe Macbeth to be aware of one's own weaknesses and character flaws. Banquo's prophecies are somewhat different. He is to be lesser than Macbeth, but greater, not as happy, but much happier, and not a king, but the forefather of kings. Once Banquo's end is revealed, these prophecies make sense. He never reaches the heights of Macbeth in terms of being king, but he never falls to the extent of Macbeth either, and he does not sell his soul to the devil and destroy himself, and in that, Banquo is much happier. He dies young at the hands of his friend and is not happy, but at least he does not destroy himself and is much happier than Macbeth will ever be. And that sort of thought should give one pause. Imagine being much happier than someone else when your life ends at the hand of a friend, and when your life ends not knowing whether your son is going to survive or be murdered by the same friend. This is an indication of what Macbeth buys the crown with. Everything he has. If Macbeth is not going to be as happy as Duncan, if Macbeth is not going to be as happy as Banquo, what does that mean of the quality of Macbeth's life? Because of the final prophecy, Macbeth feels threatened by Banquo, and thus it is one of the things responsible for Banquo's death. However, we have no way of knowing what happens to Banquo's descendants. His son escapes, but the play ends with Malcolm on the cusp of taking the crown back to the rightful line. The purpose of this prophecy seems to be to torture Macbeth and make him uncertain, as well as cause general mischief for Macbeth and those around him. Again, it is an attribute of the forces of darkness, of evil itself, that it causes trouble not only for the person seduced by it, but all of those who cross his path and all of those in his orbit. On that note, I'm going to end this video. There is more that could be said, and this by no means completely probes Act 1, but videos have to end somewhere. Look out for my next video in this series, in which I will look at Act 2 of Macbeth.